The dusty streets of Lead, South Dakota Territory, stretched before Hannah Murray like an unforgiving horizon, and she carried her heaviest quilt bundled in her arms, knowing that selling it might be the difference between eating and starving for another week. The year was 1882, and 3 months had passed since cholera had taken her husband Robert, leaving her alone in a town that had no patience for widows without means. She had tried everything to keep their small house, but the bank wanted its money, and her needle and thread were all she had left to offer the world. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Hannah made her way to the general store, where Mr. Peterson had begrudgingly allowed her to display 2 quilts last week. Neither had sold. The intricate patterns she had learned from her mother back in Pennsylvania seemed too fine for a rough mining town like Lead, where men outnumbered women 10 to 1 and most folks slept under wool blankets that smelled of horses and hard living. Still, she had to try. The alternative was unthinkable. She pushed open the door to Peterson's general store, the bell chiming above her head. The proprietor glanced up from his ledger, his expression souring the moment he saw her. "Mrs. Murray," he said, his tone suggesting he had tasted something bitter. "Those quilts of yours are taking up valuable space. I have paying customers who need that shelf." "Please, Mr. Peterson," Hannah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just 1 more week. Someone might want them. The weather will turn cold soon and people will need warm bedding." "It's summer, woman. Nobody's thinking about winter quilts." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I need that space for practical goods, tools, rope, things miners actually buy." Hannah felt her chest tighten. The 2 quilts she had left at the store represented weeks of work, countless hours of stitching by candlelight after her eyes ached and her fingers bled. She had sold 3 others for barely enough to buy flour and coffee, prices so low they insulted the craftsmanship. But what choice did she have? "I understand," she whispered, moving to collect the quilts from the shelf. The weight of them in her arms felt heavier than before, laden with failure. As she turned to leave, the door opened again, and a tall figure stepped inside, blocking the sunlight. Hannah looked up and found herself staring at a man who seemed carved from the same rough stone as the Black Hills themselves. He wore a dusty brown hat, a weathered leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard terrain. His face was tanned and lined with the kind of creases that came from squinting into harsh sunlight, but his eyes were a striking blue, clear and direct. "Excuse me, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in the small store. He stepped aside to let her pass, but his gaze fell on the quilts in her arms. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of interest or perhaps recognition. Hannah nodded and tried to move past him, but he spoke again. "Those quilts, did you make them?" She stopped, surprised. "Yes, sir." "I did." He reached out, his calloused fingers gentle as he touched the corner of the top quilt, a pattern of interlocking stars in deep blues and crisp whites. "My mother used to make quilts like this," he said softly. "Haven't seen work this fine in years, not since I left Missouri." Hannah felt a strange flutter in her chest, something she had not experienced since before Robert died. "Thank you," she managed. "That's kind of you to say." The man turned to Mr. Peterson. "How much for these?" The storekeeper perked up immediately, sensing a sale. "Well now, those are special pieces. I'd say $10 each would be fair." $10. Hannah had been selling them for $3. She opened her mouth to protest the inflated price, but the cowboy was already reaching into his vest pocket. "I'll take both," he said, "and any others you have." Hannah blinked. "Any others?" "Yes, madam. If you have more at home, I'd like to buy them all." He pulled out a leather billfold, worn but clearly well filled. "How many do you have?" "I have 3 more at home." Hannah said slowly, her mind reeling. "But sir, Mr. Peterson is overcharging you. I've been selling them for $3, and even that felt like too much to ask." The cowboy's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Peterson with something cold in his eyes. "Is that right?" he said quietly. "You were planning to charge me 10 for something you valued at 3. Peterson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Market prices fluctuate," he mumbled. "I'll give you $5 each," the cowboy said, turning back to Hannah. "That's fair for work this quality, and I won't hear any argument about it. $25 for all 5 quilts. Do we have a deal?" $25. Hannah's breath caught. That was more money than she had seen since Robert died, more than enough to pay the bank for another 2 months, enough to buy food and fabric and lamp oil and maybe even a new pair of shoes to replace the ones with holes worn through the soles. "I cannot let you overpay," she said, though her voice trembled with the effort of refusing such generosity. $3 each is already more than most folks think they're worth. "Madam, I've slept under scratchy wool blankets and thin cotton sheets for more years than I care to count. I've got money saved up from cattle drives and ranch work, and not much to spend it on. If I want to buy myself some comfort and support fine craftsmanship at the same time, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me." His blue eyes held hers, and there was no pity in them, only straightforward honesty. Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Then yes, we have a deal. Thank you, Mr." She realized she did not know his name. "Dalton," he said, extending his hand. "Harrison Dalton. Most folks call me Harris." She shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip and the roughness of hard work. "Hannah Murray." "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. You have no idea what this means to me." "Harris, please," he said with a small smile that softened the harsh lines of his face. "And I think I might have some idea. Leeds not an easy town for anyone without gold in their pockets or a claim to work. I'm guessing you've had a rough time of it." "My husband passed 3 months ago," Hannah said quietly. "I've been trying to manage on my own." Something like respect crossed Harris's face. "I'm sorry for your loss. If you'd like, I can walk you home and carry these quilts, then collect the other 3 and pay you the rest." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "If you're conducting business, I'd appreciate it if you do it outside my store." Harris gave him a long, measured look. "I don't think I'll be doing much business in here anymore, Peterson. I've got no use for a man who takes advantage of widows." He gathered the 2 quilts from Hannah's arms and nodded toward the door. "After you, Mrs. Murray." The morning heat hit them as they stepped outside, but Hannah barely noticed. Her mind was spinning with the sudden change in fortune. $25. Food, time, hope. "I live just down this street," she said, gesturing toward the row of small wooden houses that lined the edge of town. "The one with the yellow door. My husband painted it that color because I told him it reminded me of sunshine." They walked in companionable silence, Harris's boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. Hannah was acutely aware of him beside her, this stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayers. She had been too tired to pray. She studied him from the corner of her eye, noting the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, the way other men on the street nodded respectfully as he passed. He was known here, or at least recognized. "Have you been in Leeds long?" she asked. "On and off for the past year," Harris said. "I work for the Running Creek Ranch about 10 miles south of town. We bring cattle through here sometimes, sell beef to the miners. I've got a few days off, so I came into town for supplies." He glanced at her. "Lucky timing, I suppose." "Lucky for me," Hannah said softly. They reached her house, and she felt a flush of embarrassment at its shabby appearance. The paint was peeling, one of the front steps was cracked, and the small garden she had tried to maintain had withered in the summer heat despite her efforts to haul water from the well. "It's not much," she said apologetically. It's yours, Harris said simply. That's more than a lot of folks can say. He followed her up the steps, and she unlocked the door, pushing it open into the dim interior. The house was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but Hannah had kept it as clean and neat as circumstances allowed. The quilts were folded on the bed in the back room, and she hurried to gather them while Harris waited in the main room. She could not help but notice how his presence seemed to fill the space, making everything feel smaller and somehow more intimate. When she returned with the 3 remaining quilts, Harris was studying a small daguerreotype on the mantel. "Your husband?" he asked. "Yes. That was taken on our wedding day 5 years ago." Hannah looked at Robert's serious face, remembering the nervous young man who had promised to build her a good life in the Dakota territory. He had tried so hard, working in the mines until the dust got into his lungs and weakened him. When cholera swept through Lead that spring, he had not had the strength to fight it. "He looks like a good man," Harris said. "He was." Hannah set the quilts on the table and smoothed them with her hands. "These are the last ones I have finished. I've been working on a 6th, but it's only half done." Harris examined each quilt carefully, running his hands over the stitching, admiring the patterns. One featured a log cabin design in warm browns and reds, another showed a garden maze in greens and yellows, and the third was a double wedding ring pattern in soft pinks and purples. "These are beautiful," he said, and she could hear genuine appreciation in his voice. "You have a real gift, Mrs. Murray." "Hannah, please," she said. "After such kindness, I think we can dispense with formalities." He smiled again, and she noticed that when he smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkled in a way that made him look younger. "Hannah it is, then." He counted out $25 in bills and coins, placing them carefully on the table. "There you go, fair payment for fair work." Hannah stared at the money, hardly able to believe it was real. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "No thanks needed. I'm getting 5 fine quilts out of the deal." Harris gathered the quilts into his arms, but he hesitated at the door. "Hannah, if you don't mind me asking, what are your plans? Are you going to be able to keep this place?" The question was gentle but direct, and Hannah appreciated that he did not dance around the reality of her situation. "I have 2 months before the bank will take the house," she said. "This money will cover that and give me time to make more quilts to sell. I'm hoping that will be enough to keep going." Harris nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And what happens when winter comes? Lead gets buried in snow from November to April. Folks don't go out shopping for quilts when they can barely dig themselves out of their houses. Plus, your fingers will freeze trying to stitch in this cold." Hannah had tried not to think about winter. "I'll manage," she said, lifting her chin. "I've survived this long." "That you have," Harris agreed, "but surviving and living are 2 different things." He shifted the quilts in his arms. "I have an idea if you'll hear me out. I'm listening. The Running Creek Ranch where I work, they're always looking for help with domestic work. Cooking, mending, washing. The bunkhouse needs a woman's touch if I'm being honest. The owner, Mr. Jacobson, he's a fair man. He'd pay you a decent wage and provide room and board. You'd be safe, fed, and warm through the winter, and you could still make your quilts in the evenings if you wanted." Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. She had been raised to value independence, and the idea of working as a domestic felt like admitting defeat. But pride would not keep her warm when the snows came, and it would not fill her empty stomach. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I know how ranches work. The men outnumber women even more than they do in town. I'm a widow alone. Folks would talk." "Folks always talk," Harris said, "but Mrs. Jacobson runs a tight ship. She wouldn't allow any disrespect toward you, and neither would I. You'd have your own room in the main house, separate from the bunkhouse. You'd be safe, I give you my word." "You barely know me," Hannah said. "Why would you go to such trouble?" Harris met her eyes steadily. "My mother was widowed when I was 15, he said quietly. "My father died in a farming accident, and she was left alone with 4 children to raise. Folks in our town in Missouri, they helped her. They gave her work, made sure we had food, helped us keep our land until my brothers and I were old enough to work it ourselves. She used to make quilts too, just like you. Beautiful things that took her hours and hours to create. She'd sell them for whatever people would pay, just to keep us going." He paused, his jaw tightening. "She died 2 years ago, worn out from years of hard work and worry. I always wished I could have done more for her. I can't help her anymore, but maybe I can help someone else's mother. Someone else who's trying to survive with nothing but skill and determination." Hannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She saw the pain in his eyes, the regret of things left undone. "I'm not anyone's mother," she said softly. "My husband and I never had children." "You're someone who needs help, and I'm someone who can provide it," Harris said simply. "That's enough." She turned away, looking at the small room that had been her home for 5 years, at the yellow door that Robert had painted with such hope. She thought about the long, cold winter ahead, about trying to survive alone in a town that had no place for her. She thought about the alternative Harris was offering: work, safety, a chance to rebuild her life. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. I'll be in town for 2 more days, staying at the boarding house on Main Street. If you decide you want to take the job, come find me before I head back to the ranch. If not, no hard feelings." Harris tipped his hat to her. "Either way, thank you for the quilts, Hannah. They're going to make my bunk a whole lot more comfortable." After he left, Hannah sat at her small table and counted the money 3 times, making sure it was real. $25. A fortune and a lifeline. She divided it carefully in her mind. $15 to the bank, $5 for food and necessities, $5 saved for emergencies. She could stretch that $5 of food for weeks if she was careful, buying flour and beans and maybe some salt pork. The garden might still yield some vegetables if she tended it well. But what about October? November? The winter months when the cold would seep through the walls and the snow would pile higher than the windows. Hannah had been raised by practical people. Her father had been a carpenter who taught her that good work deserved fair pay, and her mother had been a seamstress who showed her that beauty could be found even in simple, functional things. They would have told her to be smart, to think ahead, to not let pride stand in the way of survival. She thought about Harris Dalton, about the steadiness in his blue eyes and the gentleness in his calloused hands as he touched her quilts. He had not looked at her with pity or condescension, but with respect. He had not tried to rescue her like some damsel in distress, but had offered her work, a fair exchange of labor for safety and security. The yellow door seemed to glow in the afternoon light, a reminder of happier times. But Robert was gone, and no amount of wishing would bring him back. Hannah had to think about her future now, about what came next. She stood and walked through the small house, touching the things that had been part of her married life. The cast iron stove that Robert had insisted on buying even though it cost too much. The rocking chair his father had made as a wedding gift. The blue curtains she had sewn to match the blue of the Dakota sky on clear days. This house held her memories, but it was not her future. She could feel that truth settling in her bones. That evening, Hannah wrote a letter to the bank, explaining that she would pay $15 toward her debt and would vacate the property by the end of the month. She explained that she was taking employment outside of town and would not be returning. It was one of the hardest things she had ever written, each word feeling like a small surrender. But it also felt like a door opening, like a possibility she had not allowed herself to imagine. The next morning, she put on her best dress, a simple brown calico that she had mended so many times the fabric was more patches than original cloth. She pinned her dark hair back neatly, washed her face, and walked to the boarding house on Main Street. Her heart hammered in her chest with each step, but she kept her head high. Harris was sitting on the porch of the boarding house, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper that was probably a week old. The way news always was out in the territories. He looked up as she approached, and something like relief crossed his face. "Good morning, Hannah," he said, standing. "Can I get you some coffee?" "Thank you, but no," Hannah said. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she clasped them together to still them. "I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to accept it, if the position is still available." Harris's face broke into a genuine smile, and Hannah realized it transformed him, making him look almost boyish despite the weathered lines around his eyes. "It is, and I'm glad. Real glad." "When can you be ready to leave?" "I need a week to settle my affairs," Hannah said. "I have to pay the bank, pack my things, and close up the house. There's not much to do, really, but I want to do it properly. A week is fine. The ranch is not going anywhere." Harris set down his coffee cup. "Do you need any help? I can stay in town a few extra days if you need someone to haul things or deal with the bank." The offer was tempting, but Hannah shook her head. "Thank you, but I need to do this myself. I need to close this chapter of my life on my own terms." Harris nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I respect that. I'll head back to the ranch today and let the Jacobsons know you're coming. In a week, I'll come back to town with a wagon to collect you and your belongings. Does that work?" "Yes, thank you, Harris, for everything." He tipped his hat to her. "No thanks needed. I'm looking forward to having some decent blankets on my bunk." His tone was light, but his eyes were warm. "And I think you'll like the ranch. It's good land, good people. You'll be safe there." The week that followed was a blur of activity. Hannah paid the bank, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness as she handed over the key to her yellow door. She sold what furniture she could not take with her, keeping only the essentials: her sewing supplies, her clothes, a few cooking implements, and the rocking chair that had been a wedding gift. Everything else went to the second-hand dealer in town for a few extra dollars. She packed her life into 2 trunks and 3 boxes, marveling at how little remained of 5 years of marriage. But as she folded her clothes and wrapped her precious sewing scissors in cloth, she felt something unexpected: anticipation. For the first time since Robert died, she was looking forward to something instead of just enduring each day as it came. On the morning Harris was due to return, Hannah woke early and dressed carefully. She had washed and mended her traveling dress, a dark blue cotton that had seen better days but was still respectable. She pinned her hair in a simple bun and waited on the porch of the house that was no longer hers, her belongings stacked beside her. Harris arrived right on time, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. He was not alone. A woman in her late 50s sat beside him, wearing a practical dress and a wide-brimmed hat. Her face was lined but kind, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Hannah, this is Mrs. Margaret Jacobson," Harris said as he climbed down from the wagon. "She wanted to come and meet you herself." Margaret Jacobson climbed down with the ease of someone who had been riding in wagons all her life. She approached Hannah with an outstretched hand and a warm smile. "Mrs. Murray, Harris has told me all about your beautiful quilts and your unfortunate circumstances. I want you to know that you're very welcome at Running Creek Ranch. We need someone with your skills, and I think you'll find it a good place to heal and start fresh." Hannah shook her hand, feeling the strength in the older woman's grip. "Thank you, Mrs. Jacobson. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Call me Margaret, dear. We're not formal folks out at the ranch. Margaret glanced at the stacked belongings. Is this everything? Yes, madam, it's not much. It's what you need, and that's what matters. Margaret turned to Harris. Well, let's get loaded up. I'd like to be back before supper. Harris made quick work of loading Hannah's belongings into the wagon, his strength making easy work of the heavy trunks. Hannah climbed up onto the seat beside Margaret, and Harris took the reins. With a click of his tongue and a flick of the reins, the horses started forward, and Hannah watched as lead grew smaller behind them. The road to Running Creek Ranch wound through the Black Hills, following a valley between pine-covered slopes. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, all rock and sky and wind-bent trees. Margaret kept up a steady stream of conversation, explaining how the ranch operated, what Hannah's duties would be, and what she could expect from life there. We run about 500 head of cattle and 50 horses, Margaret said. My husband John and I have owned the ranch for 20 years now. We have about a dozen men who work for us, good solid folks for the most part. Harris here is our foreman. He keeps the men in line and the work running smooth. Hannah glanced at Harris, surprised. You're the foreman. I thought you were just a ranch hand. He's modest, Margaret said with a laugh. Harris has been with us for 5 years now, and John promoted him to foreman 2 years back. Best decision we ever made. The men respect him, and he knows cattle and horses better than anyone I've ever met. Harris's ears turned slightly red, and Hannah found herself smiling at his embarrassment. I just do my job, he muttered. You do it well, Margaret said firmly, and that's what matters. She turned back to Hannah. Your primary duties will be cooking for the men, mending clothes and general housekeeping in the main house. I'll still do some of the cooking because I enjoy it, but my arthritis is getting worse, and I need help with the heavier work. You'll have your own room on the second floor of the house, next to ours. The men sleep in the bunkhouse, and there's a strict rule that they don't enter the main house without permission. You won't be bothered. That's a relief, Hannah said honestly. I know how rough some of these mining towns can be for women alone, Margaret said, her voice gentle. But we run a decent operation. Any man who disrespects you will be looking for work elsewhere. John and I won't tolerate it, and neither will Harris. They drove for 2 more hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Hannah found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. Margaret was easy to talk to, and she answered Hannah's questions about ranch life with patient detail. Harris remained mostly quiet, focused on driving, but Hannah was aware of his presence beside them, solid and reassuring. Finally, they crested a rise and Margaret pointed ahead. There it is, Running Creek Ranch. The ranch spread out in the valley below, more extensive than Hannah had imagined. The main house was a 2-story structure built from logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals, and a long bunkhouse. Beyond that, Hannah could see grazing cattle dotting the hillsides, and a creek sparkled in the sunlight, giving the ranch its name. It's beautiful, Hannah said, and she meant it. There was something solid and permanent about the ranch, something that spoke of hard work and careful tending. It's home, Margaret said simply. And now it will be yours too, for as long as you want to stay. As they descended into the valley, several men emerged from the barn to watch their arrival. Harris drove the wagon right up to the main house and set the brake. A tall man with graying hair and a full beard stepped out onto the porch, and Margaret waved to him. That's my John, she said to Hannah. He looks fierce, but he's a gentle soul at heart. John Jacobson came down the steps and helped his wife from the wagon, kissing her cheek with obvious affection. Then he turned to Hannah, and she saw that Margaret was right. Despite his imposing size, his eyes were kind. "You must be Mrs. Murray," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Welcome to Running Creek. Margaret's been looking forward to having another woman in the house. I think she's tired of being outnumbered by rough cowboys." "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Jacobson," Hannah said. "John, please, and welcome." He turned to the ranch hands who had gathered nearby. "Boys, this is Mrs. Murray. She'll be working in the house now. I expect you all to treat her with courtesy and respect. Anyone who doesn't will answer to me and to Harris. Understood?" There was a chorus of "Yes, sir," from the assembled men, and Hannah felt herself flush under their curious stares. But their faces seemed friendly enough, and she reminded herself that she had dealt with miners and merchants in lead. Cowboys could not be worse. Harris began unloading her belongings, and several of the ranch hands came forward to help. John directed them to carry the trunks up to the second floor while Margaret led Hannah inside. The interior of the house was rustic but comfortable. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and windows that let in plenty of light. A hallway led to the kitchen, which was spacious and well-equipped, with a large cast-iron stove, a deep sink, and counters lined with jars and cooking implements. "This is wonderful," Hannah said, running her hand over the smooth counter. "I can do a lot with a kitchen like this." "I'm glad you approve," Margaret said, smiling. "Now let me show you to your room." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Margaret pushed open a door to reveal a small but clean room with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. It was simple, but it was private and safe, and Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Thank you. Make it your own," Margaret said. "You're not a guest here, Hannah. You're part of the household now. Rest today, get yourself settled. Tomorrow we'll start you on light duties just to help you learn the routine. But today, just breathe and know that you're safe." After Margaret left, Hannah sat on the bed and looked around her new room. The mattress was firm and the quilt was thick and warm, even if it was not as fine as the one she made. Through the window, she could see Harris and the other men down in the yard, unloading the last of her belongings. Harris looked up as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met for a moment before she turned away, her cheeks warming. That evening, Hannah joined the Jacobsons for supper in the main house. Margaret had prepared a hearty meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from her garden, and they ate at a large wooden table while Margaret and John talked about the ranch, the upcoming cattle drive, and the neighbors who lived on the surrounding properties. "Harris will be taking a dozen head to market in Deadwood next week," John said. "It's about a 3-day trip there and back. While he's gone, the other men will handle the regular work around here." Hannah glanced at Margaret. "Will you need extra help in the kitchen while he's away?" Margaret smiled. "That's thoughtful of you, dear, but the men in the bunkhouse cook for themselves most of the time. We only cook for them on Sundays and holidays. The rest of the week, they take turns making their own meals. Believe me, you don't want to eat what they cook unless you have a stomach made of iron." "It's not that bad," John protested, though his eyes twinkled. "I've survived on trail food for months at a time." "Yes, and you complained about it for years afterward," Margaret retorted, and they all laughed. After supper, Hannah helped Margaret clean up, learning where things belonged in the kitchen. Through the window, she could see lights in the bunkhouse and hear the low murmur of men's voices. It was strange, being surrounded by people again after months of solitude in town. But it was also comforting, knowing she was not alone. As she was drying the last dish, there was a knock on the back door. Margaret opened it to reveal Harris, hat in hand. "Evening, Margaret," he said. I just wanted to check that Mrs. Murray's room was set up properly. If she needs anything else moved or adjusted, I can take care of it now." "Come in, Harris," Margaret said, "and I'm sure Hannah can speak for herself." Harris stepped into the kitchen, suddenly looking too large for the space. His eyes found Hannah's. "Is everything all right with your room? Do you need anything? It's perfect," Hannah said. "Thank you for bringing all my things up. I appreciate it. No trouble at all." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know this is all new and probably a bit overwhelming, but if you need anything, or if any of the men give you trouble, you come find me, all right?" There was something protective in his tone that made Hannah's heart beat a little faster. "I will. Thank you, Harris." He nodded, settled his hat back on his head, and left. Margaret gave Hannah a knowing look that made her blush. "He's a good man," Margaret said quietly. "A bit rough around the edges, but good clear through. His mother raised him right." "He told me about his mother," Hannah said. "About how she was widowed and had to raise 4 children on her own." "That explains a lot," Margaret said thoughtfully. "He's always been protective of anyone he thinks is struggling. Last winter, he gave half his wages to a family in Lead whose father broke his leg and couldn't work. Didn't tell anyone, but John found out and made sure the family knew where the money came from." Hannah absorbed this information, adding it to what she already knew about Harris Dalton. He was a man of few words but much action, someone who showed his character through deeds rather than speeches. In her experience, those were the best kind of men. Over the following days, Hannah settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke early to help Margaret prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house. In the afternoons, she took on mending projects, repairing shirts and trousers that had been torn on barbed wire or worn thin from hard use. The work was steady but not overwhelming, and she found herself enjoying the routine. The ranch hands were respectful, always tipping their hats when they saw her and thanking her politely when she mended their clothes. A few of them were younger than her, barely 20 years old, and they reminded her of boys playing at being men. Others were older, weathered cowboys who had spent their lives working cattle. They all seemed to regard her with a kind of protective courtesy that she found touching. Harris was often away during the day, riding the range with the men or handling some aspect of ranch management. But he appeared for supper most evenings, eating with the Jacobsons and Hannah in the main house. John had explained that, as foreman, Harris had standing permission to take his meals with them rather than in the bunkhouse, though he often chose to eat with his men to maintain camaraderie. When Harris did join them, Hannah found herself hyper-aware of his presence. She noticed the way he listened carefully when people spoke, the way he considered his words before responding, the way he looked at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. It made her nervous and excited at the same time, feelings she had not experienced in years. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Harris stayed after supper to help John review some paperwork related to the upcoming cattle drive. Margaret had retired early with a headache, and Hannah was finishing the dishes when Harris emerged from John's study, looking frustrated. "Everything all right?" Hannah asked. Harris ran a hand through his dark hair. "Just numbers. I'm better with cattle than with ledgers. John wants me to review the supply list for the drive, but I keep thinking we're forgetting something." "Can I help?" Hannah offered. "I used to help my husband with his accounts. I'm fairly good with figures." Harris looked surprised but also relieved. "I'd appreciate that if you don't mind. I don't want to get 3 days out and realize we forgot something essential like coffee or ammunition." They sat at the kitchen table, and Hannah reviewed the list Harris had prepared. She asked questions about how many men would be going, how long they would be gone, and what conditions they might encounter. As they talked, she made notes and suggestions, catching a few items Harris had overlooked, such as extra horseshoes and medical supplies for both men and animals. "You're good at this," Harris said, watching her write. "Better than me, that's for certain. It's just organization," Hannah said. "My father always said that any job is easier if you think it through before you start. Smart man, your father. He was." Hannah set down her pencil. "He died when I was 17. My mother followed 2 years later. That's when I married Robert. I think I was looking for family again, for belonging." "Did you love him?" The question was soft, almost hesitant, as if Harris was not sure he had the right to ask. Hannah considered. "I cared for him deeply. He was kind and hardworking, and he tried to give me a good life. I'm not sure it was the grand passion that novels talk about, but it was real and it mattered. I miss him." Harris nodded slowly. "My mother used to say that love comes in different forms. Some people get the lightning strike, all passion and fire. Others get the steady burn that keeps you warm for a lifetime. Both are real, both are valuable. That's a wise way to look at it." Hannah studied him in the lamplight. "Have you ever been married, Harris?" "No. Came close once when I was younger. A girl back in Missouri. But she wanted a farmer with land and a steady life, and I wanted to see what was beyond the horizon. We wanted different things, so we went our separate ways. Haven't really thought about settling down since then." He paused. "Been too busy working, I suppose. Too focused on the next job, the next drive, the next season. Do you regret it, not settling down?" Harris was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think I didn't, but lately I've been wondering what it would be like to have something more permanent. A home instead of a bunk, family instead of just friends, someone to share things with." The air between them felt charged, and Hannah found herself unable to look away from his blue eyes. "It's not too late," she said softly. "You're still young enough to build all of that." "Maybe," Harris said. "If I could find someone willing to take a chance on a cowboy foreman with more experience with cattle than with courting." Hannah's heart was beating fast. "I think you might be surprised by what people would be willing to take a chance on." They held each other's gaze for another moment before Harris cleared his throat and looked down at the supply list. "Well, thanks to you, I think we have everything we need for the drive. John will be pleased. I'm glad I could help." Hannah stood, suddenly needing to move to do something with her hands. "I should probably turn in. Morning comes early." "That it does." Harris stood as well, and in the small kitchen they were standing very close. Hannah could smell leather and soap and something earthy that was just him. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night, Harris." After he left, Hannah leaned against the kitchen counter, her heart still racing. She told herself she was being foolish, reading too much into a simple conversation. Harris was just being friendly, just being the good man he was. But the way he had looked at her, the things he had said about wanting something more permanent, had stirred feelings she had thought died with Robert. The cattle drive departed 3 days later, just after dawn. Hannah stood on the porch with Margaret and watched as Harris and 11 other men herded the cattle out of the valley and onto the trail toward Deadwood. Harris rode at the front on a big gray gelding, sitting tall in the saddle. He looked back once, and Hannah thought he might be looking at the house, but the distance was too great to be sure. "He'll be back in a week or so," Margaret said, noticing Hannah's attention. "Deadwood's not far, but they have to move slow with the cattle." "I'm sure they'll be fine," Hannah said, trying to sound casual. Margaret smiled but did not comment. Over the past 2 weeks, Hannah had come to value the older woman's friendship. Margaret was kind but also perceptive, and she had a way of seeing through polite facades to the truth beneath. Hannah suspected that Margaret had noticed the growing connection between her and Harris, but she appreciated that Margaret had not pressed the issue. With Harris gone, the ranch settled into a quieter routine. The remaining men handled the day-to-day tasks of feeding animals, mending fences, and maintaining equipment. Hannah and Margaret worked together in the house, and Hannah found herself enjoying the domestic tasks more than she had expected. There was something satisfying about cooking a good meal, about seeing clean laundry drying in the sun, about transforming a pile of fabric scraps into a quilt square. In the evenings, Hannah worked on her quilting. She had brought her sewing basket and some fabric with her from Lead, and Margaret had given her access to more fabric from the ranch's stores. Hannah started a new quilt, this one featuring a pattern called Flying Geese, with triangles of fabric pointing in the same direction like birds heading south. She was not sure who the quilt was for, but the work soothed her and gave her hands something to do while her mind wandered. Often, her thoughts wandered to Harris. She wondered if he was safe, if the cattle drive was going smoothly, if he thought about her at all. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that she barely knew the man, that she had no business developing feelings for him when Robert had only been gone a few months. But her heart did not seem to care about propriety or proper mourning periods. A week after the drive departed, Hannah was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, expecting to see some of the ranch hands returning from work. Instead, she saw a group of riders she did not recognize, rough-looking men with hard faces and guns on their hips. Margaret came into the kitchen, drawn by the sound of the horses. She looked out the window and her face tightened. "Stay inside," she said quietly. "Let John handle this." John was already walking out to meet the riders, and Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders. The lead rider, a man with a scarred face and a black hat, dismounted and spoke to John. Even through the closed window, Hannah could hear the aggressive tone of the conversation. "Who are they?" Hannah whispered. "Trouble," Margaret said grimly. "The one talking is Cal Brennan. He runs a gang that operates in the Black Hills. They pretend to be legitimate, but everyone knows they steal cattle and cause problems. John won't let them on our land, but Brennan tries to intimidate him every few months." Hannah watched as the confrontation continued. Cal Brennan gestured angrily, and his men shifted in their saddles, hands resting on their guns. John stood his ground, his own hand near the revolver on his hip. The tension was palpable even from inside the house. Finally, Brennan spat on the ground, said something else, and remounted his horse. The gang turned and rode away, but not before Brennan looked back at the house. His gaze swept over the building, and Hannah felt a chill run down her spine when his eyes seemed to linger on the windows. John came back inside, his face dark with anger. "They wanted access to our water," he told Margaret. "Said they'd been riding hard and their horses needed rest. I told them to move along." "They'll be back," Margaret said quietly. "They always come back. I know. I wish Harris was here. Brennan's less bold when we have more men around." John noticed Hannah's worried expression. "Don't worry, Mrs. Murray. We have good locks on the doors and rifles if we need them. Brennan talks big, but he knows better than to actually attack a ranch. There are enough honest lawmen in the territory who would hunt him down." Despite John's reassurances, Hannah felt uneasy for the rest of the day. She kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see the gang returning. When night fell, she made sure her bedroom door was locked and kept a lamp burning low, too nervous to sleep in complete darkness. 2 days later, Harris and the men returned from the cattle drive, tired and dusty but successful. Hannah was hanging laundry when she saw them ride in, and her heart leaped at the sight of Harris on his gray gelding. He looked exhausted, his face covered in trail dust, but he was safe and whole. The men took care of their horses first, unsaddling and brushing down the animals before seeing to their own comfort. Hannah forced herself to go back to her laundry, telling herself not to act like a silly girl waiting for a boy to notice her. But she was acutely aware of every sound from the barn, listening for Harris's voice. It was nearly supper time when Harris finally came up to the house. He had washed and changed clothes, though his face still bore the marks of days in the sun. He knocked on the kitchen door and Hannah opened it, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Welcome back," she said. "How was the drive?" "Successful. We got a good price for the cattle and nobody got hurt." Harris stepped inside, his eyes searching her face. "How have things been here?" "Mostly quiet," Hannah said, then hesitated. "Though we did have some unwelcome visitors a few days ago, Cal Brennan and his gang." Harris's expression darkened immediately. "What did they want?" "Access to our water," John said. He turned them away, but it made everyone nervous. "Did they threaten anyone? Did they see you?" The intensity of his concern surprised Hannah. "John handled it, and I was inside the whole time." "Why?" Harris ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking even more tired. "Brennan's bad news. He's been operating in these hills for years, always just careful enough to avoid serious trouble with the law. But he's dangerous, especially to women. A few years back, he and his men attacked a homestead near Rapid City. The family fought them off, but not before Brennan tried to carry off the farmer's daughter. She got away, but it was a close thing." Hannah felt cold. "John said he wouldn't attack a ranch." "He probably won't, especially not with all our men here, but I don't like that he was nosing around." Harris looked at her seriously. "I want you to be careful, Hannah. Don't go anywhere alone, not even to the creek or the barn. If you need something, get one of the men to go with you. Promise me." "I promise," Hannah said, touched by his concern. "But Harris, you can't protect me from everything. Life has risks." "I know that," he said quietly, "but I'd like to minimize them where you're concerned." Their eyes met, and Hannah saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. It was more than just friendly concern or protective instinct. It was something deeper, something that echoed the feelings growing in her own heart. Before she could respond, Margaret called from the other room that supper was ready. The moment broke and Harris stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should wash up properly. Tell Margaret I'll be there in a few minutes." During supper, Harris gave John a full report on the cattle drive and the market prices in Deadwood. The conversation was practical and focused on ranch business, but Hannah found herself watching Harris more than she should, noticing the way he gestured when he talked about the quality of the cattle, the way he listened intently when John asked questions. After supper, John asked Harris to stay and discuss some plans for the fall roundup. Margaret announced she was tired and headed up to bed, leaving Hannah to clean up the kitchen. She was scrubbing a pot when Harris emerged from the study, looking for her. "John said you helped with the supply list for the drive," Harris said. "Everything on that list came in handy. You have a good eye for what's needed." "I'm glad it helped," Hannah said, rinsing the pot. "Did you have any problems on the trail?" "Just the usual. A few cattle tried to wander off. One of the horses threw a shoe, but nothing we couldn't handle." Harris picked up a dish towel and started drying the dishes she had washed, working companionably beside her. "I thought about you while I was gone." Hannah's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Did you?" "Yes. I wondered if you were settling in all right, if you liked the ranch, if you were happy here." He set down a dried plate carefully. "I know it's only been a few weeks, but I hoped you were adjusting well." "I like it here," Hannah said honestly. "Margaret and John have been wonderful, and the work is satisfying. I feel useful again, like I have a purpose." "You do have a purpose. You're making this place better just by being here." Harris paused. "Margaret told me the biscuits you made last Sunday were the best she'd tasted in years." And the men won't stop talking about how you mended Tom's best shirt so well you can't even see where the tear was. Hannah laughed softly. Those are small things. Small things matter, Harris said seriously. My mother used to say that life is made up of small moments, small kindnesses, small acts of care. The big dramatic gestures are rare, but the small things happen every day and they're what really count. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I wish you could have met her. I think you two would have gotten along. Harris set down the dish towel and turned to face Hannah fully. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you feel about being here? Not just the ranch, but being around me specifically. Am I making you uncomfortable? Because if I am, I can keep my distance. I don't want to cause you any distress. Hannah turned from the sink, drying her hands on her apron. You're not making me uncomfortable, Harris. If anything, you make me feel safe, protected, seen. Seen, he repeated. Yes. You look at me like I'm a person, not just a widow or a charity case or someone to be pitied. You talk to me like my thoughts and opinions matter. That means more than you know. Harris took a step closer. Your thoughts and opinions do matter, and you're definitely not a charity case. You're one of the strongest people I've met. You lost everything and you kept going. You didn't give up. That takes real courage. I didn't have much choice, Hannah said, but she felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. Everyone has a choice. You chose to survive. You chose to keep making beautiful things even when the world seemed ugly. You chose to take a chance on a new place and new people. He was standing very close now, close enough that she could see the exact shade of his blue eyes, darker around the edges and lighter near the center. I admire that about you. Harris, she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say but needing to say something. I know it's too soon, he said, his voice low and rough. I know you're still mourning your husband, and I know you probably think I'm crazy for saying this after only a few weeks. But I have to be honest with you. I care about you, Hannah, more than I should, probably. More than is sensible or proper, but I can't help it. Hannah's heart was racing. I care about you too, she admitted. And I don't know if that makes me a terrible person, if I'm disrespecting Robert's memory. But I can't help how I feel either. You're not a terrible person. You're allowed to move forward with your life. Your husband wouldn't want you to be alone and miserable forever. How do you know what he would have wanted? The question came out sharper than Hannah intended, driven by guilt and confusion. Harris didn't flinch. Because if I loved someone the way I imagine he loved you, I'd want her to be happy. I'd want her to find joy again, even if it was with someone else, especially if it was with someone who would treat her well and value her. Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if it's too fast or if I'm thinking clearly. Then we'll take it slow, Harris said gently. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even next month. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to see where this goes. Let me court you properly. Let us get to know each other better. And if you decide you don't want this, that's all right. I'll respect your decision. What about Margaret and John? What about the other men? What will people think? Margaret and John want you to be happy. And the other men will think what they think regardless of what we do. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. So what do you say, Hannah Murray? Will you let me court you? Hannah looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her paler fingers. She thought about Robert, about the life they had planned and lost. She thought about the long, lonely months after his death, the fear and uncertainty. And she thought about the future, about the possibility of happiness and partnership and maybe even love. Yes, she said finally, looking up to meet Harris's eyes. Yes, I'll let you court me, but slowly. I need time to be sure about my feelings, to know that this is real and not just loneliness or gratitude. Slowly is good, Harris said, and his smile was like sunrise breaking over the hills. I can do slowly. I'm a patient man when it matters. They stood there in the kitchen, holding hands and smiling at each other like a couple of teenagers, until the grandfather clock in the main room chimed 10 times. Hannah laughed and pulled her hand away reluctantly. I should get to bed. Morning comes early, that it does. Harris picked up his hat from where he had set it on the counter. Good night, Hannah, sleep well. Good night, Harris. After he left, Hannah finished tidying the kitchen in a daze. Her mind was spinning with everything that had just happened. She was being courted by Harris Dalton, a man who was good and kind and handsome and who looked at her like she hung the moon. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Over the following weeks, Hannah and Harris's courtship unfolded in quiet, steady ways. Harris was true to his word about taking things slowly. He didn't try to steal kisses or push for more than she was ready to give. Instead, he courted her through small gestures and shared moments. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, bouquets of late summer blooms that she put in a jar on the kitchen windowsill. He helped her carry water from the well when he saw her struggling with the heavy buckets. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings after supper, and they talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Hannah learned that Harris had always wanted to own his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise quality horses. He loved working with cattle, but horses were his real passion. He talked about different breeds with the enthusiasm of a scholar, explaining the merits of Mustangs versus quarter horses versus thoroughbreds. Harris learned that Hannah had always dreamed of opening a shop someday, a place where she could sell her quilts and other handmade goods. She loved the creative process, the way colors and patterns came together to make something functional and beautiful. She talked about different quilting techniques with the same passion Harris showed for horses, explaining the difference between piecing and applique, between hand quilting and machine stitching. You should do it, Harris said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Open a shop, when you're ready. I think people would come from all over to buy your work. It's just a dream, Hannah said. I don't have the money to start a shop, and I'm not sure I'd even know how to run a business. Dreams have a way of coming true if you work hard enough, Harris said. And you're one of the hardest workers I know. Plus, you're good with figures and organization. You'd probably be a better businesswoman than you think. Maybe someday, Hannah said, allowing herself to imagine it for a moment. A little shop with her quilts displayed in the window, customers coming in to admire her work and place custom orders. It seemed like an impossible fantasy, but Harris's belief in her made it feel almost achievable. Margaret watched the courtship with obvious approval. She told Hannah one afternoon, while they were preserving vegetables from the garden, that she had never seen Harris so happy. He's always been a good worker, always reliable and steady, Margaret said as she sliced tomatoes. But there was a loneliness to him, a kind of restlessness. That's gone now. He seems settled, content. That's because of you. I don't know about that, Hannah said, embarrassed. Maybe he's just happy with his work. Oh, honey, I've been married for 35 years. I know what a man in love looks like. Margaret smiled. And don't worry about people judging you for moving on from your husband. Life is short, especially out here. You have to grab happiness when you find it. I do care about him, Hannah admitted, more than I expected to, but sometimes I feel guilty, like I'm betraying Robert's memory. You're not betraying anyone. You're honoring the life your husband would have wanted for you, a life filled with love and joy and companionship. Margaret set down her knife and looked at Hannah seriously. Can I tell you something? John wasn't my first husband. I was married before when I was 22 to a man named Thomas. He was killed in a barn accident less than a year after we wed. I thought my life was over. I mourned him for what felt like an eternity. But then I met John, and he was patient and kind, and eventually I realized that I could love again without diminishing what I had felt for Thomas. The heart is big enough to hold more than one love, Hannah. Your husband had his place in your life, and that will always be true. But Harris can have his place too. They don't cancel each other out. Hannah felt tears welling up. Thank you for telling me that. It helps to know I'm not the only one who's felt this way. You're definitely not alone, Margaret said warmly. And for what it's worth, I think you and Harris are well suited. You balance each other. He's all action and instinct, you're thoughtful and careful. He needs someone to help him think things through, and you need someone to encourage you to take chances. You're good for each other. As autumn approached, the ranch grew busier with preparations for the fall roundup. The cattle that had been grazing in the high country needed to be brought down before the first snows came. It was a major operation that required all hands, and Harris was gone from dawn until well after dark most days. Hannah missed him during those long days, but she also used the time to work on a special project. She was making Harris a quilt, the flying geese pattern she had started weeks earlier. The colors she had chosen were blues and grays and deep browns, masculine shades that would suit him. She worked on it every evening after her regular chores were done, stitching by lamplight until her eyes grew tired. Margaret noticed, of course. "That's a beautiful quilt," she commented one evening, watching Hannah work. "Someone special is going to be very lucky to receive it." Hannah blushed but didn't deny it. "I want to give it to him for Christmas," she said, "as a thank you for everything he's done for me." "He's going to treasure it," Margaret predicted. "Not just because it's beautiful, but because you made it with your own hands. That means something." The roundup took 3 weeks, and by the time it was finished, the aspens were turning gold on the hillsides and the mornings had a sharp chill. The cattle had been counted, sorted, and moved to winter pastures closer to the ranch. The horses had been checked and reshod. The bunkhouse and barns had been stocked with hay and supplies. Everyone was tired but satisfied with the work accomplished. On the first evening after the roundup ended, Harris came to the main house for supper. He looked exhausted, with new lines etched around his eyes and several days of beard growth on his face. But he smiled when he saw Hannah, and the warmth in his eyes made her heart skip. "I missed you," he said simply, not caring that Margaret and John were right there listening. "I missed you too," Hannah said, equally honest. They ate supper together, and afterward Harris asked Hannah if she would take a walk with him. The evening was cool but not cold, and Hannah wrapped a shawl around her shoulders as they stepped out into the twilight. They walked toward the creek, following a well-worn path through the grass. The water burbled over stones, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Harris took Hannah's hand as they walked, and she felt the now familiar warmth of his touch. "I've been thinking," Harris said as they reached the creek bank, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want?" Hannah asked, her heart beginning to race. "I want a home. A real home, not just a bunk in a shared room. I want a piece of land to call my own, some horses to raise, maybe a few cattle." He paused, then turned to face her. "And I want someone to share it with. Someone who makes me want to come home at the end of the day. Someone who makes me think about building something lasting." "Harris," Hannah whispered, understanding where this was going. "I know we've only been courting for a couple of months," Harris continued. "I know that's not very long by most standards, but I'm 32 years old, Hannah. I've met a lot of people in my life, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You're smart and strong and talented and beautiful, and when I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "I feel the same way," Hannah admitted. "When I'm with you, I feel safe and valued and seen. I feel like myself again, like I'm more than just a widow trying to survive." Harris reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Hannah's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small sapphire stone. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "My father gave it to her when they got engaged. She left it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone worthy. Hannah Murray, you are the most worthy person I know. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Hannah's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you, Harris." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, a kiss that was gentle and tender and full of promise. Hannah kissed him back, feeling a joy she had not thought she would ever experience again. This was different from what she had felt with Robert, not better or worse, just different. With Robert, it had been sweet and comfortable, like coming home. With Harris, it was exciting and passionate, like embarking on an adventure. Both were love, just different expressions of it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harris rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Hannah. I know I should have said that first before I proposed, but I'm saying it now. I love you." "I love you too," Hannah said, and saying the words felt like freedom, like permission to stop fighting her feelings and just embrace the happiness being offered to her. "I love you so much." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and when they entered the house, Margaret took one look at their faces and let out a delighted laugh. "I guess congratulations are in order," she said, hugging them both. "Oh, I'm so happy for you too." John shook Harris's hand with a grin. "About time you made an honest woman of her, Dalton. I was starting to think you'd never get around to asking." "I wanted to make sure she'd say yes," Harris said, his arm around Hannah's waist. "Of course she'd say yes," Margaret said. "Anyone with eyes could see you two were meant for each other." They celebrated with coffee and the apple pie Margaret had baked that afternoon. Hannah could not stop looking at the ring on her finger, at the way it caught the lamplight. She felt like she was living in a good dream for once instead of a nightmare. That night, as she lay in bed, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, selling quilts in a town that didn't want her. Now she was engaged to a good man, living in a place where she was valued and safe, with a future that looked bright and full of possibility. She sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for Harris, for the Jacobsons, for this second chance at happiness. The next few weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Margaret insisted on helping Hannah make a new dress for the ceremony, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored cotton with delicate lace trim. Hannah worked on it in the evenings, her fingers flying over the fabric with practiced skill. She wanted to look beautiful for Harris, wanted him to be proud to stand beside her. They decided to have a small ceremony at the ranch in early December, before the worst of the winter weather set in. Margaret and John would stand as witnesses, and they would invite the ranch hands and a few neighbors to celebrate with them. It would be simple and practical, which suited both Hannah and Harris perfectly. Harris had been saving money for years, and combined with a bonus John gave him for his excellent work as foreman, he had enough to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the Running Creek Ranch. It was about 40 acres with a creek running through it, perfect for building a house and starting a horse breeding operation. John agreed to help Harris build a modest house on the property, and several of the ranch hands volunteered their labor as wedding gifts. Construction began in late October, and Harris worked on the house every moment he could spare from his ranch duties. Hannah visited the site often, watching as walls went up and a roof took shape. It was a simple two-room structure with a loft, but Harris promised they would expand it as they could afford to. There would be a kitchen, a bedroom, and eventually a workroom where Hannah could set up her quilting. "It's not fancy," Harris said one afternoon as they stood in what would be their kitchen, looking at bare walls and an empty fireplace. "But it's ours. We'll make it a home." "It's perfect," Hannah said, and she meant it. The house represented a fresh start, a life they would build together from the ground up. "I can't wait to move in. 3 more weeks until the wedding," Harris said, pulling her close. "And then you'll be Mrs. Dalton and we'll start our life together in this house." Mrs. Dalton. Hannah tried the name out in her mind and found that she liked the sound of it. She would always treasure her time as Mrs. Murray, her years with Robert. But she was ready to be Hannah Dalton now, ready to embrace this new chapter. The wedding day arrived with clear blue skies and unseasonably warm weather for December in the Dakota territory. Hannah woke early and dressed with Margaret's help, slipping into the cream gown and pinning her hair up in an elegant style. Margaret loaned her a pair of pearl earrings that had been in her family for generations, serving as both something old and something borrowed. Hannah's something new was a pair of soft leather gloves Harris had commissioned for her from the cobbler in Lead, and her something blue was a ribbon she had woven into her hair. The ceremony took place in the main room of the Jacobsons' house, in front of the large stone fireplace. Harris stood waiting for her, dressed in a new suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. His eyes lit up when he saw Hannah, and she saw him mouth the word beautiful as she walked toward him. The circuit preacher, who made his rounds through the Black Hills mining camps and ranches, officiated the ceremony. He spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about partnership and commitment and love. Hannah and Harris exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When Harris slipped a gold wedding band onto Hannah's finger, next to his mother's engagement ring, Hannah felt tears of joy slipping down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said with a smile. "Harris, you may kiss your bride." Harris cupped Hannah's face in his hands and kissed her sweetly, and the small gathering of witnesses erupted in applause and cheers. Hannah laughed against his lips, happier than she had ever thought possible. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. Margaret and several neighboring ranch wives had prepared a feast of roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables. There was cake and coffee, and even some whiskey that John brought out for the occasion. The ranch hands congratulated them with genuine warmth, and even the gruff older cowboys got a little misty-eyed during the toasts. As evening fell, Harris and Hannah said their goodbyes and rode out to their new house. Harris had spent the previous day moving in furniture and supplies, and he had started a fire in the fireplace, so the house would be warm when they arrived. He lifted Hannah down from her horse and then, to her surprise and delight, swept her up in his arms and carried her over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dalton," he said, setting her down gently in the middle of their small house. Hannah looked around at the home they would share. The furniture was simple but sturdy: a bed, a table, some chairs, a dresser. Harris had hung curtains in the windows, and someone, probably Margaret, had left a vase of dried flowers on the table. It was sparse, but it was theirs. "I have something for you," Hannah said, suddenly nervous. She retrieved a wrapped bundle she had brought in her saddlebag and handed it to Harris. "I made this for you. For us." Harris unwrapped the package carefully and unfolded the flying geese quilt Hannah had been working on for months. His hand stilled as he took in the intricate stitching, the careful pattern, the colors she had chosen specifically with him in mind. "Hannah, this is incredible. This must have taken you forever." "I wanted you to have something made with love," she said. Something that would keep you warm and remind you that you're valued. Harris set the quilt down carefully and pulled Hannah into his arms. I don't need a quilt to remind me of that. You show me every day, but I'll treasure this, just like I treasure you. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I love you so much. I love you too, Hannah whispered. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Never, Harris said firmly. I'm never giving up on you. We're partners now in everything. Your joys are my joys. Your burdens are my burdens. We're in this together. That night, as they lay together in their new bed under the quilt Hannah had made, she felt a peace she had not known in years. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines and the stars glittered in the cold December sky. But inside, in Harris's arms, Hannah was warm and safe and loved. The winter months that followed were hard in terms of weather but easy in terms of happiness. The snow came heavy and deep, burying the valley under a white blanket that lasted until March. Hannah and Harris spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and planning for the future. Harris worked on the ranch when the weather permitted, but he was home more often during the winter months, and Hannah cherished the time they spent together. She cooked meals on their small stove, experimented with bread recipes, and continued her quilting. Harris brought home scraps of leather and cloth from the ranch, and Hannah used them to create new patterns. She made quilts for their bed, for the sitting area, for gifts to give to friends. Her hands were rarely idle, and she loved the creative work. In January, they received news from Lead that Cal Brennan and his gang had been arrested after attempting to rob a stagecoach near Deadwood. There had been a shootout, and Brennan had been killed along with 2 of his men. The rest were in custody awaiting trial. Hannah felt relieved to know that particular threat was gone, that she could move freely without fear. As spring approached, Harris began breaking ground for pastures and fencing. He bought his first 2 horses, a mare and a stallion, both from good bloodlines. He had a dream of breeding quality horses that would be in demand throughout the territory, and Hannah supported him fully. She helped him keep records of bloodlines and sales, applying her organizational skills to his venture. In April, Hannah realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or a change in routine, but when she missed a second month and began feeling nauseous in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. She told Harris one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. They had talked about children in abstract terms but had not specifically planned for a baby so soon. "Are you sure?" Harris asked, his eyes wide with shock and wonder. "As sure as I can be," Hannah said. "I have all the signs my mother told me about, and I've been married before, Harris. I know what this feels like." Harris let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy about it?" Hannah asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, Hannah, I'm thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a bigger house, and a cradle, and about 1,000 other things I haven't thought of yet." "We have time," Hannah said, laughing at his sudden frantic energy. "Babies take 9 months, remember? We'll figure it out." And they did. Harris immediately began planning an addition to the house, another room that would serve as a nursery. He worked on it in the evenings and on his days off, determined to have it finished before the baby arrived. Hannah sewed baby clothes and blankets, her fingers creating tiny gowns and soft quilts in cheerful colors. Margaret was delighted by the news and shared advice from her own experiences as a mother. She helped Hannah through the difficult first months of pregnancy, when nausea and fatigue made even simple tasks challenging. The other ranch wives brought gifts and shared their own stories, welcoming Hannah fully into their community. As Hannah's belly grew round with new life, she found herself thinking often about the past year and how much had changed. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate, selling quilts just to survive. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, living in a home they had built together, expecting a child and surrounded by friends who cared about her. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch of their expanded house watching the sunset, Harris took her hand and asked her if she was happy. "I'm more than happy," Hannah said, resting her free hand on her large belly. "I'm content. I'm grateful. I'm blessed. A year ago, I never would have imagined any of this." "I'm glad I bought those quilts," Harris said with a smile. Hannah laughed. "You overpaid for them." "Best money I ever spent," Harris said seriously. "Those quilts brought you into my life. They were worth every penny and more." "You didn't just buy quilts, you know," Hannah said softly. "You gave me hope when I had none. You saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You gave me a reason to believe in the future again." "You did the same for me," Harris said. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working and sleeping and working some more. You reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving. You taught me how to live again." Their baby, a healthy boy they named Henry Robert Dalton, was born in October on a crisp fall morning. The birth was long and difficult, and Harris paced outside the bedroom door while Margaret and the midwife attended to Hannah. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly broke down the door in his rush to get to his wife and child. Hannah was exhausted but radiant, holding their son against her chest. "Meet your son," she said, smiling through happy tears. Harris knelt beside the bed, looking at the tiny red-faced baby with wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're perfect. I can't believe he's ours." "Believe it," Hannah said with a tired laugh. "He's very much yours. He already has your stubborn chin." "Poor kid," Harris said, but his eyes were wet with emotion. He reached out a finger and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "Hey there, Henry, I'm your pa. I'm going to do my best by you, I promise." They spent the rest of that day as a family of three, marveling at the miracle of new life. Friends and neighbors came by in the following days to meet the baby and bring gifts of food and baby supplies. The house was filled with laughter and joy and the sounds of a newborn learning about the world. As winter settled in again, Hannah and Harris fell into the rhythms of parenthood. Sleepless nights and endless diaper changes were balanced by the wonder of watching Henry grow and develop. His first smile, his first laugh, his first attempts to roll over, all these moments were treasured and celebrated. Harris proved to be a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and changing diapers without complaint. He sang lullabies to Henry in his deep, rumbling voice, songs his own mother had sung to him. He built a cradle that rocked smoothly and carved wooden toys with patient care. Hannah continued her quilting, now with Henry sleeping in a basket beside her while she worked. She had started taking custom orders from neighbors and friends, and word was spreading about the quality of her work. People were willing to pay good prices for her quilts, and the extra income helped as Harris's horse breeding business slowly grew. By the time Henry was a year old, the Dalton homestead was thriving. Harris had 6 horses now, including 2 new foals that showed great promise. Hannah's quilting business was bringing in steady money. They had expanded the house again, adding a proper workroom for Hannah with good windows for natural light. They had paid off their debts and even had money in savings. More importantly, they were happy. They had built a life together based on mutual respect, love, and partnership. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy, for quiet evenings as a family, for lazy Sunday afternoons. 2 years after Henry was born, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Margaret Dalton, after Harris's mother and Margaret Jacobson. Grace was a sweet-tempered baby with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Henry was fascinated by his little sister and appointed himself her protector from day one. When Grace was 6 months old, Hannah approached Harris with an idea. "I've been thinking," she said one evening after the children were asleep, "about that shop I always dreamed of opening." "I remember," Harris said. "What about it?" "I think I'm ready to try. Not in a big way, not yet, but maybe I could rent a small space and lead just one room. Display some quilts, take orders. Margaret said she'd watch the children 1 or 2 days a week so I could manage the shop. What do you think?" Harris pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I think you should absolutely do it. You're talented, Hannah. People should have easy access to your work. And Leeds grown a lot in the past few years. There are more families now, more women who would appreciate fine handwork." "It might not succeed," Hannah warned. "It could be a waste of money, or it could be the start of something wonderful. You won't know unless you try." Harris looked at her seriously. "I believe in you, Hannah. I've believed in you since the day I first saw those quilts in Peterson's store. If anyone can make this work, it's you." With Harris's support and Margaret's help with childcare, Hannah opened her shop in May of 1885, 3 years after she had first met Harris. It was a small space on Main Street in Leeds, just one room with large windows and shelves for displaying quilts. She hung her finest work in the windows and put out a sign, "Hannah's Quilts and Fine Needlework." The first week was slow, with only a few curious customers stopping in to look. But gradually, word spread. Women came to admire the intricate patterns and fine stitching. They placed orders for custom quilts, for baby blankets, for wall hangings. Hannah's prices were fair but firm. She had learned her lesson about undervaluing her work. Within 6 months, the shop was successful enough that Hannah needed help. She hired a young widow from Leeds named Sarah, who was skilled with a needle and grateful for the work. Together, they filled orders and managed the shop, and Hannah found deep satisfaction in building something of her own. Harris's horse breeding business was also flourishing. His horses had gained a reputation for being strong, intelligent, and well-trained. He sold them to ranchers, the cavalry, and private buyers, and he was able to command good prices. The Dalton homestead expanded again, with a proper barn, additional pastures, and eventually a 3rd bedroom added to the house. As the years passed, Hannah and Harris built a life that exceeded their early dreams. They had 2 more children, twin boys named James and Joseph, born when Grace was 3. Their house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running in and out, horses neighing in the paddocks, and quilts in progress spread across every available surface. John and Margaret Jacobson remained close friends, practically family. They celebrated holidays together, helped each other through difficult times, and watched each other's children grow. When John's health began to fail in his late 60s, Harris gradually took over more of the Running Creek Ranch's management, eventually becoming a partner in the operation. Hannah's shop expanded twice, eventually taking up 3 rooms on Main Street. She employed 5 women, all skilled needleworkers, and her quilts were shipped as far as California and New York. She never forgot what it was like to be desperate and alone, so she made a point of hiring widows and women in difficult circumstances, giving them the same chance Harris had given her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harris surprised Hannah with a trip to the original spot where he had proposed, down by the creek on the Running Creek Ranch. They left the children with Margaret for the evening and rode out to the creek bank just as the sun was setting. "Do you remember standing here 10 years ago?" Harris asked, holding her hand as they watched the water flow past. I remember every moment, Hannah said. I was so scared and so hopeful at the same time. I wanted to say yes so badly, but I was terrified of making a mistake. Do you think you made a mistake? Harris asked with a teasing smile. Hannah laughed and kissed him. The best decision of my life was saying yes to you. You gave me everything I didn't dare to dream of, a home, a family, a partnership, a purpose. You saved me, Harris. No, Harris said gently, turning to face her fully. You saved yourself. You survived when everything was stacked against you. You kept going when you had every reason to give up. All I did was recognize what was already there, your strength and talent and courage. You would have been fine without me, Hannah, but I'm selfish enough to be glad you didn't have to be. I love you, Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. I loved you then, I love you now, and I'll love you for the rest of my life. And I love you, Harris said, pulling her into his arms. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who overpaid for quilts. They laughed together, remembering that first meeting in Peterson's general store, the moment that had changed both of their lives. That scared, desperate widow and that quiet, kind cowboy could never have imagined how their story would unfold, the life they would build together, the love that would grow between them. As the sun set over the Black Hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Harris and Hannah Dalton stood together by the creek, holding each other close. Behind them lay 10 years of hard work, challenges overcome, joys celebrated, and love deepened. Before them lay a future bright with possibility, children to raise, dreams to pursue, and a partnership that had proven itself strong enough to weather any storm. The quilts Hannah had sold to survive had become the foundation of a business that supported multiple families. The cowboy who had bought them all and asked her to stay had become her husband, her partner, her greatest love. And the life they had built together, piece by piece like a quilt, was beautiful and strong and warm, stitched together with commitment, respect, and enduring love. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved working with his father's horses. He had inherited Hannah's careful attention to detail and Harris's natural way with animals. By the time he was 16, he was Harris's right hand in the horse breeding operation, and people came from all over the territory seeking horses trained by the Dalton men. Grace developed a passion for quilting, learning the craft at her mother's knee. She had an artist's eye for color and pattern, often creating designs that were more adventurous than Hannah's traditional patterns. When she was 14, Hannah began taking her to the shop, teaching her the business side of their craft. Grace proved to be a natural saleswoman, charming customers while maintaining firm prices. The twins, James and Joseph, were wild and rambunctious, always getting into some kind of mischief. But they were also fiercely loyal to their family and worked hard when work was needed. They preferred working cattle to horses, and Harris made arrangements with John Jacobson for the boys to learn ranching. It seemed likely they would eventually take over Running Creek Ranch when John finally retired. One autumn evening when Hannah was 42 and Harris was 48, they sat on the porch of their house, now a substantial 2-story structure that bore little resemblance to the simple cabin they had started with. Their children were scattered around the property, doing evening chores. The sun was setting, and the air held the first real chill of approaching winter. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Hannah asked, resting her head on Harris's shoulder. "If you hadn't walked into Peterson's store that day, if you hadn't been interested in my quilts." "Sometimes," Harris admitted, "but I don't think it was coincidence. I think we were meant to find each other. Maybe not in some mystical sense, but in the sense that we were both looking for something, even if we didn't know exactly what." We were both ready for change, for connection, for love. The timing was right. "I'm grateful it was you," Hannah said softly. "I can't imagine my life with anyone else now. You've been my partner in everything. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You supported my dreams while building your own. You've been a wonderful father to our children. I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate you." "You show me every day," Harris said, kissing her forehead. "Through every meal you cook, every shirt you mend, every late night you stay up helping with accounts, every time you smile at me like I'm someone special. I know I'm loved, Hannah, and I hope you know the same." "I do," Hannah assured him. "I absolutely do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. It was a moment of perfect peace, the kind that comes from years of building a life together, of weathering storms and celebrating victories, of growing old alongside someone who truly knows you. "There's something I've been thinking about," Harris said eventually, "a kind of legacy project." "Tell me," Hannah encouraged. "You know how you hire women who need a chance at your shop, women who are widowed or in hard circumstances." When Hannah nodded, Harris continued, "I'd like to do something similar. Start a program where young men who can't afford to buy their own horses or cattle can work here and learn the trade. After a few years, if they prove themselves, we could help them get started with their own operations. Maybe lend them horses or cattle, help them find land, give them the same kind of chance that John gave me when I was young." Hannah lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining. "Harris, that's a wonderful idea. You'd be changing lives, giving people opportunities they might never otherwise have." "We'd be changing lives," Harris corrected. "It would be a partnership like everything else we do. And I thought maybe when Henry's ready, he could help run the program. He's got the skills and the temperament for it." "Let's do it," Hannah said decisively. "Let's build something that will last beyond us, something that will help others the way we were helped." And so they did. The Dalton Apprenticeship Program, as it came to be known, started small with just 2 young men learning horse breeding and training. But over the years it grew, developing a reputation throughout the territory. Young men who had no prospects, no family support, no resources, could apply to work with the Daltons. If accepted, they received training, room, board, and a small wage. After 3 years, they graduated with skills references, and often enough saved money to start their own ventures. Many of them stayed in the area, starting their own small ranches and farms. They became neighbors, friends, and eventually brought their own families to Hannah's shop for quilts and baby clothes. The community grew stronger as these young men built their own lives and paid the kindness forward to others. Hannah's shop also evolved into something more than just a business. It became a gathering place for women, a spot where they could learn skills, find employment, share advice, and support each other. Hannah started teaching quilting classes in the evenings, passing on the techniques her mother had taught her. Some of her students were young girls learning a traditional craft, but others were women like she had been, desperate for a skill that could help them survive. As Harris and Hannah entered their 50s, they began to slow down slightly, letting their children take on more responsibility. Henry managed the horse breeding operation almost entirely on his own now, with Harris serving more as an advisor than a daily worker. Grace ran the shop with Hannah coming in only a few days a week. The twins had indeed taken over much of the Running Creek ranch work, as John was now in his 80s and mostly retired. Hannah and Harris found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company, to take long rides through the hills they loved, to sit on their porch and watch their grandchildren play. Henry had married a lovely young woman named Catherine, and they had 2 children. Grace was courting a young lawyer who had recently moved to lead. The twins, now in their early 20s, were still young but showing interest in various young women in the area. One day, as Hannah was sorting through old trunks in the attic, she came across the quilts that Harris had bought from her all those years ago. He had kept them all this time, carefully stored away. She unfolded them one by one, remembering the circumstances under which she had made each one. These quilts represented the lowest point of her life, made during desperate times when survival was uncertain. But they also represented her resilience, her refusal to give up, her determination to use her skills to forge a path forward. And they had brought Harris into her life, had been the catalyst for everything good that had followed. That evening, she brought the quilts down to the sitting room and spread them out for Harris to see. "I found these in the attic," she said. "I had forgotten you kept them." Harris ran his hand over the nearest quilt, a log cabin pattern in browns and reds. "I could never get rid of them," he said. "These quilts are part of our story. They're where everything began." "What should we do with them?" Hannah asked. Harris thought for a moment. "I think we should give them to our children and grandchildren. Each quilt represents a different part of our journey together. Henry should have the first one, the one that made me realize you were someone special. Grace should have the flying geese quilt you made me before we were married, since she's the one who inherited your quilting passion." "And the others?" Hannah prompted, smiling at his thoughtfulness. "The twins can each have one, and we'll save one for ourselves to remember where we started." Harris pulled Hannah close. "These quilts are artifacts of our love story. They should stay in the family, be passed down, carry our story forward." "You're a sentimental man, Harris Dalton," Hannah said fondly. "Only about the things that matter," he replied. "And you, Hannah Dalton, matter more than anything else in this world." They distributed the quilts to their children that Christmas, telling the story of how Hannah had been selling quilts to survive, how Harris had bought them all and offered her a new start, how that simple transaction had led to a courtship, a marriage, a family, and a life neither of them could have imagined. The children and grandchildren listened with rapt attention, seeing their parents in a new light. To them, Harris and Hannah had always just been solid, stable presences, people who had their lives together and knew what they were doing. Hearing about the uncertainty, the fear, the leap of faith required to build what they had, made them appreciate their parents' strength even more. "So you're saying," Henry said thoughtfully, looking at the quilt Hannah had given him, "that I exist because Dad decided to buy some quilts?" "Essentially, yes," Harris said with a grin. "Best purchase I ever made." "I think," Grace said quietly, her fingers tracing the flying geese pattern, "that this is one of the most romantic stories I've ever heard. Not because it was dramatic or grand, but because it was real. You chose each other deliberately, built something together from nothing, and created a whole world. That's beautiful." Hannah felt tears pricking her eyes. "That's exactly what we did. We created a world piece by piece, just like a quilt, and we did it together." As the years continued to pass, Hannah and Harris watched their family expand further. More grandchildren arrived, filling the homestead with laughter and chaos. The businesses they had built continued to thrive under the management of their children. The apprenticeship program sent dozens of young men out into the world with skills and hope. The shop employed multiple generations of women, creating a legacy of craftsmanship and female entrepreneurship. When Harris was 62, he had a health scare that reminded them both that time was precious. He recovered fully, but it prompted them to have important conversations about the future, about what they wanted their remaining years to look like. "I want to spend more time with you," Harris said as they sat together during his recovery. "Not working, not managing, just being together. We've built something wonderful, but I don't want to spend all my time maintaining it and miss out on enjoying it." "I agree," Hannah said, squeezing his hand. "We've earned the right to slow down. The children can handle things. Let's give ourselves permission to just live." And so they did. They officially retired, turning the horse operation fully over to Henry and the shop over to Grace. They kept their house and a small pasture for a few favorite horses, but they no longer worked full days. Instead, they traveled, visiting parts of the territory they had never seen, taking trips to Missouri to visit Harris's brothers, spending time with each of their children and grandchildren. They also spent time on simple pleasures. Hannah quilted for joy rather than profit, creating pieces just because she loved the colors or patterns. Harris trained horses occasionally, working with young colts because he enjoyed it, not because he needed to. They read books aloud to each other in the evenings. They took long walks through the hills. They made love with the comfort and knowledge that decades of intimacy brings. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the Running Creek Ranch. The whole community came, a testament to the lives Harris and Hannah had built and the people they had touched. There were former apprentices who were now successful ranchers, women who had worked at Hannah's shop and gone on to start their own businesses, friends and neighbors whose lives had been enriched by knowing the Daltons. Speeches were made, toasting the happy couple and recounting stories of their kindness, their hard work, their love for each other and their community. Hannah and Harris sat together, holding hands, sometimes laughing and sometimes crying as people shared memories and gratitude. At the end of the evening, Harris stood to speak. His hair was mostly gray now, his face deeply lined from decades in the sun, but his blue eyes were as clear and direct as ever. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, and everyone laughed because it was true. "But I want to say a few things. First, thank you all for being part of our lives. Community is everything, and we're grateful for ours." He paused, looking down at Hannah. "Second, I want to talk about love. 25 years ago, I walked into a general store in Lead and saw a woman holding some quilts. She looked tired and scared and determined all at once, and I thought she was the most interesting person I'd ever seen. I bought those quilts, but what I really did was take a chance on connection. And Hannah took a chance on me, trusting a cowboy she barely knew to be honest and kind." Hannah was crying now, not bothering to hide her tears. Harris continued, his voice rough with emotion. "That chance we took changed everything. It brought us children and grandchildren, brought us this community, brought us joy and purpose and meaning. But most of all, it brought us love. Real, deep, lasting love. The kind that grows stronger over time instead of fading. The kind that survives hardship and celebrates joy. The kind that makes life worth living." He reached down and pulled Hannah to her feet, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Hannah Murray Dalton, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You're my partner, my friend, my love, my home. Thank you for saying yes 25 years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day we've had together." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Hannah buried her face in Harris's chest, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and happiness. They swayed together slowly as someone started playing a fiddle, dancing to music only they could fully hear, the song of a love story that had begun with quilts and a cowboy's kind heart. Harris and Hannah Dalton lived into their 80s, enjoying many more years together. They saw all their children married and successful, met great-grandchildren, and watched their community continue to grow and thrive. The businesses they had started became institutions, known throughout the Dakota territory and beyond. When Hannah finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 84 with Harris holding her hand, the entire town of Lead mourned. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched. Women brought quilts she had made or taught them to make. Young men who had been through the apprenticeship program came to pay respects to the woman who had supported her husband's vision of giving others opportunities. Harris grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the memories they had made, in the life they had built together. He lived for 2 more years, spending his days telling stories to his great-grandchildren, riding his favorite horse through the hills, and sleeping under the flying geese quilt Hannah had made him before their wedding. When Harris passed away at 86, he was buried beside Hannah on a hilltop overlooking their homestead. The headstone, carved by his grandson, reads simply, "Harris Dalton, beloved husband, father, and friend, he bought quilts and found love." Next to it, Hannah's headstone read, "Hannah Murray Dalton, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She made quilts and built dreams." The homestead they had created continued through the generations, maintained by their descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. The horse operation thrived under Henry's children. The shop lasted well into the 20th century, eventually becoming a historic landmark in Lead. The apprenticeship program became a model that other ranches copied. But more than the physical legacy, Harris and Hannah left behind something more precious: a story of love, resilience, and the courage to take chances on connection. It was a story passed down through generations, told to children and grandchildren as an example of what partnership and commitment could build. Years after both were gone, visitors to Lead would sometimes ask about the beautiful quilts displayed in the Historical Society Museum, quilts with patterns like log cabin and flying geese and double wedding ring. And the docents would smile and say, "Let me tell you a story about a widow who sold handmade quilts to survive, and a cowboy who bought them all and asked her to stay." And the story would begin again, alive in the telling, a testament to the truth that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that 2 people working together can build something beautiful that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. The quilts remained, carefully preserved, each one a piece of fabric and thread that had stitched together not just clothes, but 2 hearts, 2 lives, and ultimately, 2 souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed. In the end, Harris and Hannah's love story was itself like one of Hannah's quilts, carefully crafted, beautifully designed, warm and comforting, made to last, and stitched together with love that would never fade.